Today I want to talk about racism, and I want to ask the question, is it still time to change? Hi, my name's Coast and welcome to the PaperThin Place, and on this channel we talk about what we think, how we think, and how that then impacts each other. We have conversations around communication, creativity and culture. Sometimes we do that through the lenses of leadership, diversity and art. Diversity and racism are things that I think about a lot, partly because of it's an area that I'm wanting to explore more professionally, but also as a kind of British but Chinese person, there are multiple different levels and multiple different kind of lived experiences that aren't just things of the past, they are things of the present, and they're also, I guess they impact my future as well. So what do I mean by that? Well, at the time of recording, we are a few days after the 2nd year anniversary of the murder of George Floyd. It was this huge kind of cultural kind of moment that was such a shared experience that it went global. At that moment, lots of organizations, lots of kind of groups and stuff like that made statements about how they were going to change and how they were anti-racist. And you know, to a certain extent, there were some almost like cultural promises that were made. In the 2nd year after that, then, you know, there was still movement. And, you know, we've seen in our media and in our kind of like promotion stuff that there's been a greater diversity in kind of, you know, press stuff. Yeah, at the same time, probably I'd ask the question around, well, has the leadership of those companies, of those organizations, of those groups, etc., how has that changed? Have we seen greater implementation of frameworks that allow for more diversity and more opportunity? You know, a lot of us said that we would read books and that we would educate ourselves, and that's great. I don't want to take away from any of that, but all of those things ultimately have to end and result in some sort of impact and change. And 2 years on from George Floyd, you know, we've still seen significant issues around racism in football. We still see kind of reported hate crimes in our kind of communities. So when I ask the question, is it still time to change? Yes, I am being slightly deliberately provocative into that, but I'm not being judgmental. I promise you, I'm not being judgmental. I'm just trying to resurface the question, because in these last 2 years, it feels like things have dipped. It feels like things have cooled down a bit. It feels like, despite the statements made and all that kind of like business, that it's not as hot an issue for people as it once was. Now, I totally get that life is crazy, and life is definitely crazy right now. But I want to ask the question, I want to resurface the question, because I think there's a challenge in there about delivering on the things that we said we were going to do. And that delivery isn't necessarily about the delivery in a certain sense. I think for me, it's reflective of a commitment to the thing that you said you were going to do. It's a reflection of how important that issue really is to you. And when I say you, I mean me as much as anything else. It's a shared experience. It's a shared responsibility that these big issues need to be handled in more than just a tokenistic way. That these big issues, because they are big issues, require us to dig in deep and to commit to the longer term kind of journey of trying to work against these things, to not necessarily kind of solve it all in one go, but to commit to the journey that the big issue requires of us. And honestly, I'm not being judgmental. I might get a little bit frustrated sometimes, but I'm not being judgmental, because I'm aware that I am a human being, that I have my own fallibility, that I make my own mistakes, that I haven't progressed as far as I personally would have wanted to. And like I said, there's so much going on right now in so many different ways, and there's the ongoing impacts of the last few years in so many different ways. But I am asking to maybe re-engage, maybe kind of think again about the commitments that you made at that time a couple of years ago, to think about the books that you read or the statements that you made, and re-engage for the long term, re-engage for the longer journey. In some senses, the way I look at the last few years, maybe like the first year was shock and still kind of reeling and recovering from the things that we've seen. And maybe then the second year was beginning to kind of organize and work stuff out and try some stuff out. But now that we're entering like the third year after the murder of George Floyd, maybe now we need to be making some real progress. Maybe we need to be digging in a little bit deeper into those frameworks, into those systems, into our models and processes, and looking at how can we really begin to lay down some better foundations for the future. Sometimes I think about the analogy of building a house and how part of that process is digging deep and building proper, better foundations before you establish like the walls or like the decorations or like the furnishings. All of that stuff requires everything to be sat on good foundations. So as we think about this third year after George Floyd, and we think about the ongoing continual issues around prejudice and racism and diversity, let's dig deep. Let's dig deep and make good foundations for whatever we want to see next. And we'll do that as a cumulative and cooperative thing that actually requires all of us to be engaged in that. It is not a singular responsibility, but a joint responsibility for us as communities and us as human beings on a shared planet. So is it still time to change? Yes, 100%, absolutely it is. And that journey, I know, is a long, ongoing one. And we're allowed to take pauses, we're allowed to take rests, we're allowed to kind of work stuff out and juggle lots of different priorities. But at the same time, think about what you felt, think about the commitments that you made, and take the time to think about this next year and think about what you want to do. So keep on going, because it is still time to change. Okay, thanks for watching and thanks for listening. And if it's helpful, maybe share this with somebody else and subscribe and all that kind of like business. All right, thanks very much. Bye.